is David Calvo. I'm the Director of Family and Community Engagement at CABE, the California Association of Bilingual Education. And today we have with us Bao Phi, one of our spotlight speakers at CABE conference, and you have a huge crowd following. Tell us more about your presentation.
Oh yeah, thank you for asking and thank you for having me. So really my presentation was in 3 parts, and I had talked to the CABE organizers about what they think would flow. And so what we agreed upon was a short presentation about my journey being a Vietnamese refugee, being raised in a big, poor Vietnamese refugee family in the mid-70s, coming to America, and really my journey from that to being a writer. So that was the first part. The middle part was me reading my latest children's book, which is a poem that I wrote for children, trying to empower them and talk about love with them during a time of tremendous anti-Asian violence and doubt and hurt and pain. I wanted to write something for kids, so I wrote my latest children's book to them on that subject. And then the third part, which I really was glad to do, which I often don't get to do, was I got to talk about the adult part of those feelings, right? So the middle part, the thing for kids, that's like the G-rated version of it. And then because this is a crowd of educators, I also got to talk about how I felt as an adult and as a father going through that phase. So I felt very privileged to be in the space where I could really talk about all 3 of those things, which I don't often really get to do.
That's fantastic. So I think the last part that you were saying, a little bit of your heart was coming out.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to just unpack that a little bit more.
Sure.
Could you share with us a story?
Well, sure. Well, thank you for asking. So like a lot of people, like everyone on earth, I and my family struggled through the pandemic. We all went through it differently depending on so many different things: class, race, gender, where we are in the world, right? And my particular struggle was being an Asian American person. And as you probably know, my people were scapegoated for COVID. The president at the time called it China virus, and there was just so much hate and ignorance, and that manifested in a lot of different ways, including, unfortunately, a lot of anti-Asian violence. And the way that I see it is, I felt like there was 2 violences that happened. So one was the literal violence, right? Where Asian people were being attacked. Of course, that's nothing new. Any of us who know history know that that's happened in the past. Yeah. After 9/11, a lot of South Asian, Arab-presenting Asian folks suffered after that.
Yes.
As an example. So it wasn't new, but that was like one part of the violence, was seeing the resurgence of it. And then I feel like the second violence was that we were still erased from discussions about race and racism in America, because people were like, oh, well, that's terrible that that's happening, but that's not really racism, right? Because Asian people, racism doesn't happen to you people, right? And I think that just goes back to people not understanding who Asian and Asian American people are. They don't understand our history and our struggle. And so I felt like there was a double hurt and a double pain happening, where yes, we were being hurt and people didn't take it seriously. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and I saw a lot of that on the news, and I have a lot of Asian friends. So it was just frustrating for me that perpetual racism and violence and unnecessarily.
Absolutely.
What can we do about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, part of it is, like, you probably already know, you have like Asian people in your life. Part of it was, I think, talking to a lot of fellow Asians, we felt so alone because no one reached out to us. No one said anything like, hey, this must be really painful for you. Are you okay? And if you have Asian people in your life, you probably have already done that. And that's what I encourage people to do. Like, I encourage people, one thing that we can do is not gaslight each other. So, and it's not just Asian people. Certainly Asian people were being gaslighted. But one thing I learned is also, if someone else tells me that they're being hurt, for me to take it seriously and to listen to them, because I know what it feels like for people to not take it seriously when it happened to me, right?
Sure.
So that's just one thing, being a human being, just reaching out. And the other thing is like talking to our kids about it and doing what we can, And so part of the thing, like, I felt so powerless and I felt so angry and I didn't know what to do. And so I asked myself, what is it how do you contribute to the world? I'm a writer, so I wrote a book about it. and not all of us are writers, but we contribute to the world in different ways. And I just encourage folks to think about how they can make a world a better place, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
that's something I ask myself too. So, yeah.
So this book, can you tell us a little bit about the storyline or?
Sure. So, it's funny. This is my first children's book. I have 4 children's books,
Okay.
but the other 3 are very narrative. So they're stories, right? This is my first children's book that's a poem, which is funny because I come from a poetry background.
Okay.
And so really, the book is really just an empowering, happy poem that tells children that they're loved. And, certainly I'm directing it at Asian American children, but I also hope that it touches any children who's felt different or alone, or maybe they're an immigrant or they're a refugee, or they felt out of place for whatever reason. I hope that, that they can read it and feel some beauty in it. It's just really a lyrical poem saying, I love you,
That sounds just so inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you.
So earlier you shared you have Vietnamese background.
Mhm.
Do you speak Vietnamese?
Yeah, so I do. So I come from a fully bilingual household where the first language in my home is Vietnamese, right? But I grew up in America, I was born in Vietnam, but I was a baby when we came as refugees. And so at home, I was fully immersed in the language and the culture. But, in America, you go to school, it's a completely different thing. Everyone's like English, 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 right? And to the point where those of us who don't speak English very well, it's like we're ridiculed for it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we internalize that. So in various stages of my life, my Vietnamese language skills have gone like this, right? And so very quickly, as a kid, I was pretty bilingual. And then I got older and I lost it a little bit. But then in college, I studied abroad in Vietnam. And then for a while, I wasn't able to read or write until then. But I spent time in Vietnam, and then my language skills went like this, to the point where my mom was like, hey, good job. That it's serious when your mom is like, okay, right? And then in recent years, I told myself I would keep it up. I haven't. But I will say that now, every Sunday, I Zoom with other Vietnamese Americans, and we try to help each other. We have a language group every Sunday, and I try to make it. And basically what we do is we give each other topics, and then we talk in Vietnamese for an hour. So the last Sunday, someone else came up with this idea. You're on a deserted island. What 3 items do you bring? And you have to like write it and talk about it all in Vietnamese. So it's important to me. I've let my language skills slip, but I'm trying to come back to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think I'm hearing that language is part of your identity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's definitely part of my identity. As refugees, my parents weren't planning to come here. And I think my parents looking back on it, I can see what was so difficult for them. They wanted us to hold on to our language and our culture, but at the same time, they saw how much hatred there was towards people who looked like us and our culture and our language. And so I think for my parents, it was so difficult because they're like, hold on to your culture, but that actually makes you a target, right?
Yeah.
And so part of me is kind of like honoring that conflict and that struggle. And to tell you the truth, it also just feels good to be able to meet a Vietnamese person and talk a little bit. Like my Lyft driver from the airport happened to be a Vietnamese person.
Wow.
And it was fun. Like we just happened to be able to talk a little bit in Vietnamese, and that feels good to me, So yeah, it's important to me. Yeah.
Absolutely. I get that. So you shared about being a parent, and you shared about your parents wanting that bilingual education experience for you.
Yeah.
What message might you share with parents who are wondering whether or not their children should do immersion or should master another language?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the more languages, the better, right? Like, to me, it comes down to like, the more ability you have to communicate with different people, the more beautiful it is, and the better place the world is going to be. Like I ask myself that question all the time. Like, don't expect everyone to learn how to speak English so they can talk to you, right? And so I would, and it's hard, but I would encourage it because it's really important. Yeah.
All right, you've been in the bilingual education space for quite some time. Where do we have to go? What's the next frontier?
I really think it needs to be systemic change, right? Because I think citizens like you and I, we know how important it is, but until we change the curriculum, until we change like these ways of thinking that are so rigid, that like really force and shame people into like learning English only, there's only so much we can do, right?
Yeah.
And I really do think that structural change is what needs to happen. And I don't know how to do that because I'm not a politician and I don't work in infrastructure of education. So I don't know how to do that. But I really feel like there are human beings, there are educators, parents, people like you who know it's important. Now we got to get it so that the wider culture understands it's important too, right?
Sure. I mean, I think you're already doing that work because when you're on the stage and you have hundreds of people or even thousands in the audience, you're getting that message out, and awareness, I think, is the first part of initiating the change for that systemic change that we need to see.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Yes.
All right. Bao, anything else you'd like to share with our audience? I know you have a session to get to and other activities to do, but I want to make sure we capture your stories.
Oh, no. Thank you so much. I think we covered everything. And I just want to, again, reiterate how thankful I am for this opportunity. Like, you know, again, I don't want to beleaguer the point, but I come from a big, poor family. And so the idea that I get to travel and talk to people about my ideas, I don't take that for granted. And also my past job, I was an events organizer. And so I know like a ton of work, sleepless nights goes into things like this. And so I'm just really grateful for everyone for doing this and for giving me the opportunity. So I just want to say thank you, I guess. That's the last thing I want to say.
Thank you, Bao. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great conference.
Oh, I'm already, so thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.